June 15, 1944. Saipan Island, Northern Mariana Islands. Lieutenant Colonel Takeshi Goto pressed his field glasses against the concrete observation slit of his reinforced bunker. Below him, the beaches of Saipan stretched like a white ribbon against the emerald Pacific. For 18 months, his engineers had transformed this paradise into a fortress. Concrete pillboxes dotted the shoreline. Artillery positions crowned every ridge. Tank traps carved geometric scars across potential landing zones. "Sir," his aide whispered, pointing toward the horizon. The American fleet. Goto adjusted his binoculars. What he saw challenged comprehension. More than 800 ships stretched from horizon to horizon, the largest invasion fleet ever assembled in the Pacific theater. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and countless landing craft painted the ocean grey. But as he studied the approaching landing ship tanks through magnified lenses, something made his blood run cold. Massive angular shapes loomed on their decks, not the light M3 Stuart tanks they had faced at Guadalcanal, but enormous 31-ton monsters with thick armor plating and massive 75mm guns. The M4 Sherman medium tank had arrived in the Central Pacific in unprecedented numbers. What none of the Japanese defenders realized was that these steel behemoths would shatter everything they believed about island warfare, transforming the tactical landscape of the Pacific theater forever. The age of American armored dominance in amphibious warfare was about to begin with devastating consequences for Japan's defensive strategy. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's assassination in April 1943 had left Japan's naval strategy in ruins, but the empire's defensive doctrine remained unchanged. Island fortresses would become killing fields. Every beach would exact such a terrible price in American blood that the United States would negotiate peace rather than continue the slaughter toward Japan's home islands. The Mariana Islands represented the crucial test of this strategy. Saipan, Tinian, and Guam formed Japan's inner defensive perimeter, part of the absolute national defense zone established in September 1943. If they fell, American B-29 superfortresses could reach Tokyo itself. The psychological impact would be devastating. For the first time, Japanese civilians would face the reality of strategic bombing on their home soil. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito commanded 32,000 Japanese troops on Saipan. His defensive preparations had consumed 18 months of intensive construction using Korean forced laborers and Japanese construction crews. Concrete bunkers with walls 4 feet thick dotted every potential landing zone. Artillery positions commanded interlocking fields of fire. Tank traps and obstacles channeled attacking forces into predetermined killing zones, where concealed anti-tank guns waited. The Japanese high command believed their preparations were impregnable. American light tanks had proven ineffective against reinforced concrete during earlier Pacific campaigns. Infantry attacks could be channeled and destroyed by concentrated firepower from mutually supporting positions. The Tarawa experience in November 1943 had shown that American casualties could reach devastating levels when attacking fortified positions. But the arrival of Sherman medium tanks in company strength represented a capability the Japanese had never encountered in the Pacific theater. Intelligence reports from Tarawa described only a handful of medium tanks, most lost during the chaotic landing. Saipan would witness over 150 M4 Shermans employed in coordinated combined arms operations. For the Americans, Saipan meant more than strategic bombing bases. It represented proof that their industrial might could project decisive power across 6,000 miles of ocean. The Sherman tank, mass-produced in quantities that dwarfed Japanese manufacturing capacity, would become the hammer that broke Japan's defensive strategy across the entire Central Pacific. The strategic context was enormous. Simultaneous with the Saipan invasion, the Pacific Fleet would fight the decisive Battle of the Philippine Sea, destroying Japanese carrier aviation forever. Admiral Raymond Spruance commanded Task Force 58, the most powerful naval formation in history, with 15 aircraft carriers and 956 aircraft. The combination of naval supremacy and armored ground forces would demonstrate American military capabilities that Japan simply could not match. Getting a 31-ton Sherman tank from an American factory to a Pacific beach represented logistical challenges that bordered on impossible. Each M4A2 Sherman required specialized shipping aboard landing ship tanks, ungainly vessels measuring 328 feet long but capable of carrying only 14 tanks per voyage across 4,000 miles of hostile ocean. The mathematical precision was staggering. A single Sherman consumed approximately 50 gallons of diesel fuel per hour during sustained combat operations. In tropical conditions, with electrical systems operating continuously, consumption increased to 60 gallons per hour. Pacific Islands lacked infrastructure. Every gallon of fuel, every artillery shell, every spare part had to be transported across vast oceanic distances while maintaining supply lines vulnerable to submarine attack. Ammunition logistics alone defied comprehension. The Sherman's 75mm M3 L40 gun fired shells weighing approximately 15 pounds each for high-explosive rounds, 18 pounds for armor-piercing projectiles. Standard combat load was 90 main gun rounds per tank. For a company of 15 Shermans, that meant 24,000 pounds of main gun ammunition. Machine gun ammunition for the coaxial 30 caliber and hull-mounted 50 caliber guns added another 15,000 pounds per company. Mechanical reliability became life-or-death mathematics. A broken track or failed transmission 6,000 miles from American industrial centers meant a 31-ton paperweight. Pacific climate destroyed rubber seals within weeks. Salt air corroded electrical systems faster than maintenance crews could repair them. Tropical humidity jammed mechanical components. Spare parts took months to arrive, assuming supply ships avoided submarine attacks. The geography of Pacific Islands created unique engineering challenges. Fine dust, harder than sand, clogged air filters within hours of operation. Razor-sharp fragments tore apart rubber track pads designed for European soil. Beach gradients often exceeded Sherman climbing capabilities, requiring specialized engineering equipment to create passable routes inland. Japanese defensive preparations had anticipated every American capability except one: the concentrated firepower and armor protection of medium tanks operating in company-sized formations. Their Type 1 47mm anti-tank guns were designed to stop Soviet 26 light tanks or captured Chinese vehicles. Their concrete bunkers could withstand indirect artillery bombardment, but had never faced direct fire from 75mm tank guns at ranges under 200 yards. The waterproofing requirements pushed engineering capabilities to their limits. Shermans had to operate in water depths up to 54 inches without flooding engines or electrical systems. Every possible water entry point required sealing with specialized compounds. Air intake systems needed extension tubes that could be jettisoned after reaching dry ground. Emergency escape procedures had to account for crew evacuation from submerged vehicles. Supply chain calculations revealed the true magnitude of American industrial commitment. Each Sherman tank required approximately 2,000 man-hours to manufacture. Supporting one tank company in combat for 30 days demanded 40 LST voyages carrying fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and replacement vehicles. The logistics tail for armored operations extended back to steel mills in Pittsburgh, rubber plantations in Liberia, and oil refineries in Texas. First Lieutenant Edward James Bale commanded Company C, I Marine Amphibious Corps Tank Battalion, the 1st Marine Medium Tank Unit deployed to the Central Pacific. Born in Detroit, Michigan in 1918, Bale had worked as a production supervisor at the River Rouge plant before enlisting after Pearl Harbor. At 26 years old, he possessed intuitive understanding of mechanical systems combined with natural leadership abilities that made him ideal for commanding complex armored operations. Bale's technical expertise had been proven during 18 months of training in New Zealand and Australia. While other tank units struggled with maintenance in tropical conditions, his company achieved 97% operational readiness through meticulous attention to preventive maintenance and crew training. He had personally supervised waterproofing modifications on each of his 15 M4A2 Shermans, ensuring engines could operate reliably during amphibious landings. His company consisted of 3 platoons of 5 tanks each. Each Sherman carried a crew of 5: tank commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver, who also operated the hull machine gun. These crews had trained together for over a year, achieving the mechanical coordination essential for survival in armored combat. Sergeant Robert Morrison commanded the lead Sherman, designated Colorado. Born in 1920 in Highland Park, Michigan, Morrison had worked on the Ford assembly line before enlisting in the Marine Corps in early 1942. His intimate knowledge of internal combustion engines and mechanical systems made him the company's unofficial maintenance expert. Morrison understood every component in his tank's General Motors 6046 twin diesel engines, which generated 410 horsepower through synchronized operation. Morrison's crew represented typical American tank personnel, working-class men with mechanical aptitude and determination to prove themselves in combat. Corporal James Johnson served as gunner, a former machinist from Cleveland who could place 75mm shells with remarkable accuracy. Private First Class Anthony Romano loaded ammunition, a steelworker's son from Pittsburgh whose physical strength allowed rapid handling of ammunition during sustained combat. Technical Sergeant Harold Nakamura served as the battalion's intelligence specialist and liaison with Japanese-American interpreters from the Military Intelligence Service. Born in California's Central Valley to immigrant parents, Nakamura had studied engineering at the University of California before the war. His analysis of Japanese fortification techniques, based on captured documents and prisoner interrogations, would prove vital in developing tactics for tank infantry coordination against prepared positions. Lieutenant Colonel Takeshi Goto commanded the 3rd Battalion, 118th Infantry Regiment, was responsible for defending Saipan's southern beaches, where American intelligence indicated the main landing would occur. A graduate of the Imperial War College in 1933, Goto had studied fortification engineering during a 2-year assignment with German forces in the mid-30s, observing construction of the Siegfried Line. Goto understood American industrial capacity better than most Japanese officers, having served as a military attaché in Washington from 1937 to 1939. His intelligence estimates correctly predicted the size and composition of the American invasion force, but he had underestimated the psychological and tactical impact of massed Sherman tank operations against fixed fortifications. His defensive sector included 12 reinforced concrete bunkers, each with walls 4 feet thick, and roofs capable of withstanding direct hits from 8-inch naval guns. Interconnected tunnels allowed movement between positions without surface exposure. Pre-registered artillery positions covered every potential landing zone with interlocking fields of fire. Captain Hiroshi Yamada commanded elements of the 9th Tank Regiment on Saipan, 34 operational tanks from his original complement. His unit included 23 Type 97 Chiha medium tanks and 11 Type 95 Hago light tanks, representing Japan's most modern armored vehicles available in the Pacific. The Chiha tanks weighed 15 tons and mounted 47mm guns, while the Hago tanks weighed only 7 tons with 37mm armament. Yamada was a realist who understood his tank's critical limitations. Japanese armor doctrine emphasized speed and maneuverability over protection, suitable for fighting Chinese forces or supporting infantry attacks against poorly equipped opponents. Against American Sherman tanks with superior armor, firepower, and mechanical reliability, his vehicles would be severely outclassed in direct combat. His tank crews averaged 3 years of experience, mostly gained during the Second Sino-Japanese War. They were skilled in infantry support operations and familiar with their vehicles' capabilities, but none had faced enemy armor comparable to the Sherman. Their training emphasized determination and sacrifice rather than tactical withdrawal when facing superior forces. Colonel Takuzo Iketa commanded the artillery regiment supporting Saipan's defense, including 12 Type 1 47mm anti-tank guns positioned to cover likely tank approaches. These weapons could penetrate Sherman's side or rear armor at ranges under 500 yards, but were ineffective against frontal armor, except at point-blank range. Iketa's gunners were well-trained and disciplined, but their equipment was inadequate for the threat they would face. American intelligence gathering for Operation Forager, the code name for the Marianas invasion, had reached unprecedented sophistication by mid-1944. Submarine reconnaissance missions photographed every beach gradient and obstacle with precision that astounded ground commanders. High-altitude B-24 Liberator bombers, equipped with specialized cameras, mapped Japanese defensive positions from 30,000 feet, identifying individual gun emplacements and bunker locations. Major General Holland McTayer Howling Mad Smith, commanding the V Amphibious Corps, studied aerial photographs with magnifying glasses for weeks before the invasion. Smith understood that Sherman tanks would revolutionize Pacific warfare, but only if they could reach the beaches intact and operational. Pre-landing bombardment would have to neutralize coastal artillery capable of destroying landing ship tanks before they could discharge their cargo. The bombardment plan called for unprecedented firepower concentration. 7 battleships, 11 cruisers, and 26 destroyers would deliver 15,000 tons of shells onto Saipan's beaches and defensive positions over 3 days. Carrier aircraft would contribute an additional 800 tons of bombs and rockets. The objective was not merely to destroy Japanese positions, but to create shell holes that could provide cover for advancing infantry and tanks. Tank waterproofing required engineering innovations never before attempted on such scale. Marine Corps engineers developed specialized sealing compounds that could withstand saltwater immersion for up to 6 hours, while maintaining engine and electrical system integrity. Air intake systems were modified with extendable snorkels that allowed operation in water depths exceeding 5 feet. Every possible water entry point required attention: engine compartments, transmission housings, electrical panels, ammunition storage areas, and crew compartments. Rubber gaskets and waterproof seals replaced standard components. Special drainage systems allowed water removal after reaching dry ground. Emergency procedures were developed for crew escape from partially submerged vehicles. Fuel planning consumed months of detailed calculations. Each Sherman required 150 gallons of diesel fuel for internal tanks, plus additional external storage for extended operations. Combat consumption rates in tropical conditions, with air conditioning and electrical systems operating continuously, averaged 60 gallons per hour. Sustained combat operations required refueling every 5 to 6 hours. Fuel supply operations required specialized equipment transported specifically for tank operations. Portable fuel pumps, flexible hoses, jerry cans, and fuel testing equipment had to be pre-positioned on beaches immediately after securing landing zones. Fuel storage areas required protection from artillery fire and camouflage from aerial observation. Ammunition logistics demanded industrial-scale organization unprecedented in Pacific operations. Each Sherman carried 90 main gun rounds distributed as follows: 50 high-explosive shells for bunker destruction and infantry support, 25 armor-piercing rounds for potential tank combat, 15 smoke shells for concealment and marking targets. Machine gun ammunition totaled 9,600 rounds per tank, 4,800 for the coaxial 30 caliber gun, and 4,800 for the hull-mounted 50 caliber weapon. Maintenance preparations required complete mobile repair facilities. Each tank company included organic maintenance sections with specialized equipment, track repair tools, engine diagnostic equipment, welding apparatus, and comprehensive spare parts inventories. Combat experience had demonstrated that mechanical reliability was as important as firepower in determining tactical success. The Japanese prepared for every contingency, except the scale and sophistication of American armored operations. Their intelligence estimates suggested the invasion force might include 50 to 60 tanks, mostly light vehicles for infantry support. The reality would be over 150 Sherman medium tanks organized into coordinated combined arms teams with dedicated infantry, artillery, and engineer support. Japanese anti-tank preparations reflected their experience fighting Soviet armor in border conflicts during the late 1930s. Their Type 1 47mm guns had proven effective against 26 light tanks and BT series fast tanks. Against Sherman frontal armor, these weapons would be marginally effective, only at extremely close range, with perfect shot placement. Mine warfare represented Japan's most promising anti-tank technique. Extensive minefields, with both anti-tank and anti-personnel devices, covered likely tank approaches. However, mine construction used steel that was increasingly scarce in Japan's war economy. Many mines used ceramic or concrete cases that were less reliable than metal equivalents. Dawn, June 14, 1944. The troopship Xylin rode gently in pre-dawn swells 15 miles off Saipan. In the tank deck, Sergeant Morrison supervised final maintenance checks on Colorado and the other Shermans of Company C. Engine oil levels verified at maximum capacity. Track tension adjusted to manufacturer specifications. Main gun bore sighted using precision optical equipment. Radio frequencies tested and confirmed operational on all command nets. "Morrison," Lieutenant Bale called over the rumble of engines, "remember the waterproofing procedures. Keep those twin diesels running until you're completely clear of the waterline. If that power plant dies in 5 feet of surf, we're all swimming home to California. The Sherman's General Motors' 6,046 twin diesel engines rumbled with mechanical confidence. These synchronized power plants generated 410 horsepower, transmitted through controlled differential steering to tracks capable of propelling 31 tons at 26 miles per hour on roads, 15 miles per hour cross-country. The drivetrain had been proven in thousands of tanks, but never under Pacific amphibious combat conditions. Loading ammunition required precision choreography in cramped fighting compartments. High explosive shells went into ready racks closest to the main gun for immediate access. Armor-piercing rounds were stored in floor compartments beneath the turret. Machine gun ammunition filled every available space not occupied by crew equipment. Personal gear was limited to absolute essentials: medical kits, emergency rations, and individual weapons. Final inspections covered every critical system. Periscopes cleaned and adjusted for optimal visibility. Radio equipment tested on all frequencies with backup crystals readily available. Fire extinguishing systems charged and operational. Emergency escape procedures rehearsed for underwater bailout if necessary. Crew assignments reflected months of training and coordination. Morrison, as tank commander, occupied the right side of the turret with responsibility for tactical decisions and target designation. Corporal Johnson, as gunner, controlled the 75mm gun and coaxial machine gun from the left side of the turret. Private Romano, as loader, handled ammunition supply and assisted with target acquisition. Driver Private First Class, Michael O'Brien from Boston, controlled vehicle movement from the hull compartment, operating transmission and steering systems through mechanical linkages. Assistant Driver Private Thomas Anderson from Minnesota operated the hull machine gun and assisted with navigation and observation. Lieutenant Colonel Goto reviewed his defensive plan with methodical precision, studying sand table models that replicated every detail of his assigned sector. Coastal artillery would engage American landing craft at maximum range, focusing on the largest vessels carrying tanks and heavy equipment. Beach obstacles would channel surviving landing craft into predetermined killing zones, where anti-tank guns and infantry weapons could achieve maximum effectiveness. "Sir," his communications sergeant reported, "all units confirm final readiness. Artillery positions report full ammunition loads. Anti-tank gun crews have completed range cards for all likely tank approaches. Observation posts are manned and reporting normal conditions." Goto nodded acknowledgement while privately calculating odds of success. Intelligence reports suggested American tank strength far exceeded previous estimates. Over 100 medium tanks, supported by unlimited artillery and naval gunfire, presented challenges that exceeded Japanese defensive capabilities. However, duty demanded maximum effort, regardless of tactical probability. Japanese defensive doctrine emphasized depth and mutual support. Primary beach positions would delay and disrupt landing forces while inflicting maximum casualties. Secondary positions inland provided killing zones where American armor could be destroyed through concentrated anti-tank fire from concealed positions. Final defensive lines protected critical installations and provided positions for last-ditch resistance. Captain Yamada conducted final inspections of his tank company positions. His 34 tanks were dispersed in concealed revetments covering likely American advance routes. The Type 97 Chiha tanks carried 47mm guns capable of penetrating Sherman side armor at ranges under 400 yards. The lighter Type 95 Hago tanks would provide infantry support and harassment of American supply lines. "Honorable tank commanders," Yamada addressed his assembled crews, "tomorrow we face the ultimate test of our training and dedication. American tanks are numerous and well-equipped, but our superior fighting spirit and familiarity with local terrain will achieve victory. Remember that each of you represents the honor of the Emperor and the strength of the Japanese fighting man." The reality of the tactical situation was more sobering than Yamada's rhetoric suggested. Japanese tanks were designed for infantry support against lightly equipped opponents, not tank versus tank combat against heavily armored vehicles with superior firepower. His crews were skilled and motivated, but their equipment was fundamentally inadequate for the mission they would face. Colonel Iketa's anti-tank gun positions represented Japan's most effective counter to American armor. His 12 Type 1 47mm guns were positioned in concealed bunkers with excellent fields of fire covering tank approaches. These weapons required precise shot placement against Sherman weak points, but well-trained crews could achieve penetration under favorable circumstances. Japanese mine warfare preparations had been extensive but were hampered by material shortages. Steel anti-tank mines were replaced with improvised devices using captured ordnance or ceramic cases that were less reliable. Minefield patterns were carefully planned but lacked the density necessary to stop determined armored attacks supported by engineer equipment. Pre-dawn hours, June 15th. The pre-landing bombardment began with the fury of industrialized warfare concentrated on a single small target. Battleships Pennsylvania, California, Tennessee, and Maryland opened fire with 16-inch guns that hurled armor-piercing shells weighing 2,700 pounds. The sound transcended human comprehension, a continuous thunder that vibrated through ship hulls and human bones 15 miles from the target. Colorado sat in the flooded well deck of landing ship Tank 317, twin diesel engines idling at 800 revolutions per minute. Sergeant Morrison watched through his commander's periscope as explosions erupted across Saipan's beaches like volcanic eruptions. Each battleship shell created craters 30 feet in diameter and 20 feet deep, throwing debris hundreds of yards in all directions. "Sweet Mother of God," Morrison's loader whispered over the intercom, "they're turning the whole damn island into powder." Morrison understood what his crew didn't grasp from their limited perspective. The bombardment looked devastating from 15 miles offshore, but Japanese engineers had designed their concrete bunkers to survive everything except direct hits from the heaviest naval guns. Most defensive positions would survive the barrage and emerge ready to destroy American landing forces with concentrated fire. Early morning hours. "Prepare to launch landing craft," echoed through LST-317's public address system. The massive ship's ballast tanks flooded systematically, lowering the stern until Pacific water poured into the tank deck. Morrison engaged Colorado's transmission and prepared for the most dangerous phase of the operation. "Here we go, Marines," he announced to his crew over the intercom. "Keep those weapons loaded and ready. Watch for muzzle flashes from concealed positions. Stay close to our infantry when we reach the beach." The Sherman lurched forward as Morrison drove down the LST's bow ramp into 5 feet of Pacific Ocean. Warm seawater surged around the tank's hull, but the waterproofed twin diesels continued running smoothly. The shoreline loomed 900 yards ahead through morning mist and smoke from the continuing bombardment. Immediately, Japanese coastal artillery that had survived the bombardment opened fire with deadly accuracy. 120mm shells erupted around the approaching landing craft like enormous waterspouts. LST-298 took a direct hit amidships, erupting in orange flames and black smoke. The 4 Shermans aboard were lost before they could engage any targets. Morrison drove Colorado through increasingly shallow water, maintaining steady forward progress while his driver monitored engine temperature and oil pressure. Through his periscope, he could observe Japanese machine gun tracers arcing overhead like lethal fireflies. Marine infantry from the assault waves hugged the sand, pinned down by devastating crossfire from concealed positions. Morning hours. Colorado reached the high water line where sand met tropical vegetation. Through his commander's cupola, Morrison could see the first Japanese defensive position clearly. A reinforced concrete bunker with walls 4 feet thick and a 75mm gun covering the entire beach approach. Lieutenant Bale's voice crackled through the radio net. "Colorado, you're our lead tank on the beach. Take out that bunker so the infantry can advance inland. Use high-explosive ammunition for maximum effect against the concrete." Morrison traversed the turret until the 75mm gun aimed directly at the bunker's main firing port. At 250 yards range with a stationary target, accuracy was guaranteed. The critical question was whether high-explosive shells could penetrate reinforced concrete that had been specifically designed to resist naval gunfire. Morrison centered his gunner's sight on the Japanese bunker's firing port, while his crew completed combat preparations. The concrete structure dominated the beach approach, its 75mm gun already engaging Marine infantry with devastating precision. American casualties were mounting rapidly as Marines remained pinned down on the exposed sand. "Gunner ready," reported Corporal Johnson, his eye pressed to the telescopic sight. "High explosive loaded. Range estimated 250 yards. Driver, halt," Morrison ordered. "Loader, stand by for rapid fire. We may need multiple rounds to breach that concrete." The Sherman's suspension settled as Private O'Brien engaged the parking brake and shifted the transmission to neutral. Colorado was now a stationary 31-ton artillery piece with armor protection that could withstand Japanese return fire while delivering precision strikes against fortified positions. "Fire," Morrison commanded. The 75mm M3 gun fired with thunderous authority that echoed across the entire beachhead. The tank rocked backward against its suspension as the 15-pound high-explosive shell covered 250 yards in less than 1 second, striking the bunker's firing port with devastating kinetic energy. The result was immediate and shocking to everyone who witnessed it. The concrete structure, engineered to withstand indirect artillery bombardment, couldn't resist direct fire from a tank gun at point-blank range. The high-explosive shell penetrated the firing port and detonated inside the bunker, killing the gun crew instantly and destroying the 75mm gun. "Jesus H. Christ!" Morrison's loader exclaimed over the intercom. "We blew that thing wide open." But Morrison was already traversing the turret toward the next target. 2 more bunkers commanded the beach approaches with interlocking machine gun fire. Marine infantry remained pinned down, unable to advance without tank support to eliminate the defensive positions that had survived the naval bombardment. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders was immediate and devastating. Lieutenant Colonel Goto, observing from his command post 600 yards inland, watched his carefully prepared coastal defenses being destroyed by weapons he had never anticipated. His concrete bunkers, designed to stop battleship shells, were being penetrated by tank guns firing at ranges where accuracy was guaranteed. Radio communications throughout the Japanese defensive network crackled with panicked reports. "American heavy tanks are destroying our positions with direct fire. Coastal defense bunkers are being eliminated systematically. Request immediate anti-tank support." Goto realized that his 18 months of defensive preparation had been based on fundamentally incorrect assumptions about American capabilities. Sherman tanks weren't just infantry support weapons, they were mobile artillery pieces capable of destroying any fortification through precise direct fire. Mid-morning hours, 3 additional Shermans from Lieutenant Bale's company reached the beach despite continuing Japanese artillery fire. China Gal, Cecilia, and Angel spread across the beachhead, their twin diesel engines roaring as they climbed the gradient and began systematically destroying Japanese defensive positions. The Marines responded with immediate tactical coordination that had been rehearsed during months of training. Infantry squads that had been pinned down for over 90 minutes began advancing behind the tanks, using 31-ton armor protection while providing close security against Japanese anti-tank teams. The combined arms coordination that would dominate Pacific warfare was being perfected under combat conditions. Tanks destroyed bunkers and eliminated machine gun nests. Infantry prevented Japanese soldiers from approaching tanks with magnetic mines or satchel charges. The tactical effectiveness was multiplicative rather than additive. Staff Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, commanding a Japanese Type 1 47mm anti-tank gun, watched the approaching Shermans with growing desperation. His weapon could penetrate Sherman side armor at ranges under 400 yards, but the American tanks were advancing directly toward his position, presenting their thickest frontal armor. "Range 350 yards, his gunner reported with barely controlled anxiety. "Load armor piercing," Nakamura ordered. "Aim for the turret front. Fire when ready." The anti-tank gun fired with sharp crack that echoed across the battlefield, but the armor-piercing shell bounced harmlessly off Colorado's frontal armor. The impact wasn't even noticed by Morrison's crew as they continued advancing and engaging targets. "Sir, our gun is completely ineffective against the frontal armor," Nakamura's gunner reported with panic evident in his voice. Nakamura understood the tactical reality immediately. His anti-tank gun, designed to stop Soviet 26 light tanks, was helpless against Sherman frontal protection. Japanese defensive doctrine had never anticipated this scenario, where their primary anti-tank weapons were completely ineffective. Determined to fulfill his duty despite tactical impossibility, Nakamura grabbed Type 99 magnetic anti-tank mines and prepared for a suicide attack against Colorado's tracks. It was the only remaining technique that might disable American armor. Morrison spotted movement in the jungle vegetation ahead through his commander's periscope. "Hull gunner, infantry in the trees, 10 o'clock, engage with machine gun fire." Private Anderson's .50 caliber machine gun chattered with mechanical precision, sending streams of armor-piercing bullets into the tropical vegetation. Nakamura died before he could approach the tank, his desperate suicide mission ending in failure like so many Japanese anti-tank attempts. By late morning, Lieutenant Bale's 4 operational tanks had destroyed every Japanese bunker covering the primary landing beaches. Marine infantry advanced inland behind the Shermans, encountering only scattered resistance from demoralized defenders. The beachhead that Japanese planners expected to hold for at least 72 hours had fallen in less than 6 hours. The tactical revolution was complete and undeniable. Sherman tanks had broken Japanese defensive doctrine so thoroughly that future Pacific campaigns would follow the template established on Saipan's beaches. The successful establishment of American beachheads created immediate panic throughout Japanese command structure on Saipan. Lieutenant Colonel Goto received intelligence reports that seemed to contradict physical laws. American tanks were destroying reinforced concrete bunkers that should have withstood anything except direct hits from battleship guns. His carefully prepared defensive positions were collapsing faster than reserves could respond to contain the breakthrough. "Sir," his communications officer reported with obvious distress, "all coastal defense positions in sectors 7 through 12 have fallen silent. We're receiving reports of multiple American tanks advancing inland toward the airfield." Goto studied his tactical map with growing comprehension of the disaster unfolding. His anti-tank guns had been positioned to engage light tanks, not 31-ton monsters with armor that was apparently immune to Japanese weapons. His own tank company was designed for infantry support, not tank versus tank combat against superior American armor. But surrender or withdrawal was not an option under Japanese military doctrine. Duty demanded fighting to the death, regardless of tactical impossibility or strategic hopelessness. Goto would commit his reserves in desperate counterattacks, hoping superior numbers and familiarity with local terrain might succeed where superior preparation had failed. For the American forces, the tactical success created operational challenges that hadn't been fully anticipated. Sherman tanks had proven devastatingly effective against Japanese fortifications, but fuel consumption in tropical conditions with continuous air conditioning operation exceeded all planning estimates. Combat operations at maximum power settings consumed diesel fuel at rates that threatened to outrun supply capabilities. Lieutenant Bale conducted rapid assessment of his company's status while maintaining tactical momentum. 4 tanks remained operational with adequate main gun ammunition, but fuel levels were dropping faster than anticipated. Machine gun ammunition was being consumed rapidly during continuous engagements with Japanese infantry attempting infiltration attacks. "Morrison," Bale radioed to his lead tank commander, "what's your fuel situation? We need to maintain pressure on the Japanese before they can reorganize their defenses." "Approximately 3/4 of a tank remaining, sir," Morrison replied while scanning for targets through his periscope. "Maybe 4 hours of combat operations at current consumption rates." The tactical mathematics were becoming critical factors in operational planning. Sherman tanks could destroy any Japanese defensive position, but only if they maintained adequate fuel and ammunition supplies. Pacific logistics had to evolve rapidly to support sustained armored operations 6,000 miles from American industrial centers. Fuel supply operations required immediate improvisation. Marine engineers began clearing paths for fuel trucks while combat continued. Portable fuel pumps and jerry cans were unloaded directly onto the beaches under continuing Japanese artillery fire. The logistics tail for armored operations was being established under combat conditions. Medical evacuation procedures also required adaptation for tank operations. Wounded crew members needed specialized extraction techniques from cramped fighting compartments. Tank recovery operations demanded heavy equipment that hadn't yet reached the beachhead. Maintenance and repair capabilities were limited to what individual tank crews could perform with organic tools and spare parts. Afternoon, June 16th. Japanese preparations for desperate counterattack revealed the complete magnitude of American technological and industrial superiority. Captain Yamada assembled his surviving tank crews for what everyone understood would be a suicidal mission against American beachhead positions that were now defended by superior armor in prepared positions. Yamada's 34 tanks had been reduced to 30 operational vehicles after American air attacks and long-range artillery fire had destroyed several revetments. His remaining force included 20 Type 97 Chiha medium tanks and 10 Type 95 Hargo light tanks, representing Japan's entire armored reserve on Saipan. The tactical disparity was mathematically brutal and psychologically devastating. Sherman 75mm guns could penetrate Japanese tank armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Chiha 47mm guns couldn't penetrate Sherman frontal armor at any practical combat range. It wouldn't be a battle between equivalent forces. It would be mechanical execution of inferior equipment by superior weapons. Honorable tank commanders, Yamada addressed his crews with dignity, despite their hopeless situation. We will attack at dawn tomorrow to drive the American invaders into the sea. Their tanks are powerful and numerous, but our superior fighting spirit and willingness to sacrifice our lives will achieve victory for the Emperor. The rhetoric couldn't disguise the reality that experienced tank commanders understood perfectly. Japanese armor doctrine had emphasized speed and maneuverability suitable for fighting Chinese forces or supporting infantry attacks against poorly equipped opponents. Against American Sherman tanks with superior armor, firepower, crew training, and mechanical reliability, they faced annihilation. American intelligence intercepted Japanese radio communications, planning the tank attack through signals intelligence capabilities that had been proven decisive since Midway. Lieutenant Bale received advance warning of the approaching assault with professional satisfaction. Sherman tanks had been designed specifically for tank versus tank combat. Finally, they would face their primary intended mission under ideal tactical conditions. All tank commanders, Bale broadcast on company radio net, enemy armor attack expected before dawn. Load armor-piercing ammunition and prepare defensive positions covering the airfield approaches. This is exactly what we trained for during 18 months of preparation. The psychological impact throughout Japanese forces on Saipan was becoming critical to overall defensive capabilities. Troops who had been told their fortifications were impregnable had watched concrete bunkers dissolve under Sherman gunfire. Traditional military virtues seemed irrelevant against technological superiority that rendered individual courage meaningless. Japanese high command in Tokyo received radio reports that contradicted every fundamental assumption about Pacific warfare. American tanks were not only reaching Pacific beaches intact but systematically destroying fortifications that had required 18 months to construct. The entire defensive strategy for the Central Pacific was collapsing in real time as tactical reports arrived. Emperor Hirohito himself received briefings about Saipan that described American capabilities that seemed to transcend previous understanding of warfare. If 31-ton tanks could be transported across 6,000 miles of ocean and employed effectively in amphibious operations, what other technological capabilities did American industry possess? The strategic implications extended far beyond immediate tactical concerns. Saipan's airfields would provide bases for B-29 superfortresses capable of reaching Japan's home islands. American industrial capacity was projecting decisive military power across global distances while maintaining supply lines that Japanese forces couldn't interdict effectively. Dawn, June 17th. Captain Yamada led his 30 tanks through pre-dawn darkness toward American positions defending Aslito airfield, knowing that most of his crews would die within the next hour. His Type 97 Chiha tanks advanced in extended line formation, their 47mm guns loaded with armor-piercing shells that couldn't penetrate Sherman frontal armor under any tactical circumstances. The advancing Japanese tanks represented not just military hardware but human courage facing impossible odds. Tank commanders like Sergeant Hiroshi Tanaka had trained for 3 years, fought in China, and understood their equipment's limitations better than their superiors. They advanced because duty demanded sacrifice, not because tactical success was possible. Sergeant Morrison watched the approaching Japanese armor through Colorado's commander periscope with professional respect, mixed with inevitable sadness. At 1,000 yards, the enemy tanks looked pathetically small compared to American Shermans. Their thin armor and inadequate guns seemed almost pitiful against the firepower Morrison commanded. "Gunner, target lead tank, range 1,000 yards, Morrison ordered with calm precision. "Armor-piercing loaded and ready," Corporal Johnson replied, tracking the Japanese tank through his telescopic sight. "Fire." The 75mm gun fired with devastating authority that echoed across the entire airfield complex. The armor-piercing shell covered 1,000 yards in 1.2 seconds, striking Yamada's command tank with tremendous kinetic energy that penetrated the Kiha's inadequate armor like paper. The Japanese tank exploded in orange flames as its ammunition storage detonated in sympathetic explosions. Yamada died instantly along with his crew, their tactical radio net falling silent and eliminating command coordination for the remaining tanks. Without central control, individual Japanese tank commanders continued advancing according to their original orders, presenting perfect targets for American gunners who had trained extensively in precision marksmanship. The engagement became systematically one-sided destruction rather than tactical maneuvering between equivalent forces. Morrison's Colorado destroyed 5 Japanese tanks during the engagement. China Gal destroyed 4 more. Cecilia and Angel accounted for additional tanks each. By full daylight, 28 Japanese tanks lay burning across Aslito airfield. Only 2 Chiha tanks escaped, their crews abandoning damaged vehicles rather than face certain death. American tank crews reported the engagement with professional satisfaction, but without celebration or triumphalism. Japanese tankers had demonstrated exceptional courage, advancing against impossible odds rather than retreating when tactical success became impossible. Their sacrifice deserved respect, even from enemies who had destroyed them. The human cost extended far beyond mechanical destruction. Yamada's tank company represented months of intensive training and irreplaceable equipment that Japan could no longer replace. More critically, their elimination removed Saipan's only mobile reserve capable of counterattacking American breakthrough operations. Lieutenant Bale submitted his after-action report with meticulous attention to technical details while acknowledging the courage of Japanese opponents. Enemy tank crews demonstrated exceptional bravery and tactical discipline despite facing overwhelming disadvantages in equipment and firepower. Their willingness to continue attacking under hopeless conditions deserves recognition. The tank battle confirmed American technological superiority in every measurable category: armor protection, firepower, crew training, mechanical reliability, and tactical doctrine. Pacific armored warfare would be characterized by one-sided technological dominance rather than tactical maneuvering between equivalent forces. For surviving Japanese forces on Saipan, the destruction of their armored reserve marked the beginning of inevitable defeat. Infantry fighting from fixed positions could delay American advances but couldn't prevent ultimate tactical failure when facing combined arms teams with unlimited logistical support. The complete destruction of Japanese armored forces on Saipan sent shockwaves through Imperial headquarters in Tokyo that reverberated throughout Japan's military and political leadership. Intelligence reports described American tanks systematically destroying fortifications that were supposed to represent the strongest defensive positions in the Pacific theater outside the Japanese home islands themselves. Emperor Hirohito received personal briefings about the battle that described American capabilities that seemed to transcend previous understanding of modern warfare. 31-ton tanks transported across 6,000 miles of ocean, supported by unlimited ammunition and fuel supplies, operating with mechanical reliability that exceeded Japanese expectations based on their own industrial limitations. Prime Minister and War Minister General Hideki Tojo faced strategic reality that contradicted every fundamental assumption about Japan's defensive capabilities. Island fortifications could no longer impose prohibitive costs on American amphibious operations. The defensive strategy that was supposed to make invasion too expensive for American political tolerance had collapsed completely during its first major test. The psychological impact on Japanese civilian morale was equally devastating when government censors could no longer conceal the magnitude of the defeat. Saipan's fall would place Tokyo itself within range of B-29 strategic bombers. The war that was supposed to remain safely distant was approaching Japan's home islands, with technological capabilities that Japanese industry couldn't match. American strategic planners understood immediately that Sherman tanks had revolutionized Pacific warfare, with implications extending far beyond immediate tactical success. Islands that would have required months of bloody infantry fighting could now be secured in weeks through tank infantry coordination supported by overwhelming logistical capabilities. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, received battle reports that exceeded his most optimistic projections for American casualties and operational timeline. Sherman tanks had broken Japanese defensive doctrine so completely that future island campaigns could follow proven templates rather than requiring extensive preparation for unknown tactical challenges. The industrial implications were equally significant for long-term strategic planning. America was producing Sherman tanks at monthly rates exceeding Japan's total wartime tank production while simultaneously transporting them across global distances to remote battlefields. Japanese manufacturing capacity couldn't compete with American production even when fighting on interior lines close to industrial centers. Meanwhile, the simultaneous Battle of the Philippine Sea was destroying Japanese carrier aviation permanently. Admiral Raymond Spruance's Task Force 58 sank 3 Japanese aircraft carriers and destroyed over 400 aircraft in what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japan lost the ability to conduct offensive naval operations, while American forces demonstrated they could project decisive power anywhere in the Pacific. Japanese anti-tank doctrine required fundamental revision that available time and resources made impossible. 47mm guns effective against Soviet armor were helpless against Sherman frontal protection. New weapons development would require industrial capacity that Japan was committing to aircraft and naval construction for homeland defense. The strategic bombing implications were immediate and terrifying for Japanese leadership. B-29 bombers operating from Saipan could reach every major Japanese city and industrial center. American strategic bombing doctrine emphasized destroying civilian morale through area bombardment of urban areas, promising devastation that Japanese air defenses couldn't prevent. General Curtis LeMay's 21st Bomber Command would eventually conduct the most destructive strategic bombing campaign in history from Marianas bases, culminating in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Sherman tanks that secured Saipan's beaches made possible the strategic bombing that forced Japan's surrender. Tojo's government collapsed within weeks of Saipan's fall. The prime minister, who had promised decisive victory, found himself unable to explain how American industrial capacity could transport heavy armor across oceanic distances while maintaining complex supply chains that Japanese forces couldn't interdict. His resignation marked the beginning of Japan's acceptance that the war was lost. The Sherman tank's Pacific debut established patterns of American technological dominance that would characterize warfare for decades beyond World War II. The combination of armor protection, firepower, mechanical reliability, and logistical sustainability created battlefield superiority that enemy forces couldn't overcome through tactical skill or individual courage alone. Combined arms coordination techniques perfected on Saipan became standard doctrine throughout the remainder of the Pacific War and influenced American military thinking through the Korean conflict and beyond. Infantry advanced behind tanks using armor protection while providing close-range security against anti-tank teams. Tanks destroyed fortifications while infantry eliminated concealed threats. The tactical synergy maximized both weapons systems' effectiveness exponentially. Japanese defensive adaptations emphasized concealed anti-tank positions, suicide attacks, and improvised explosive devices rather than traditional fortifications. These techniques required troops to abandon prepared positions, making them vulnerable to artillery bombardment and close air support. Sherman tanks had forced tactical changes that weakened overall Japanese defensive capabilities systematically. The industrial lessons resonated through American defense planning for the remainder of the 20th century. Manufacturing capacity that could produce weapons systems in overwhelming quantities while maintaining global supply lines created decisive advantages that tactical innovation alone couldn't overcome. The Sherman represented American industrial warfare at its most effective and sustainable. Pacific logistics evolved to support complex armored operations across oceanic distances that had never been attempted in military history. Fuel supplies, ammunition stocks, spare parts inventories, and maintenance capabilities achieved unprecedented sophistication. The ability to sustain heavy equipment thousands of miles from industrial centers demonstrated logistical supremacy that became foundational to American global military presence. Training doctrine emphasized mechanical maintenance as much as tactical employment throughout American armored forces. Sherman tanks achieved operational readiness rates exceeding 90% during Pacific campaigns through meticulous attention to preventive maintenance and crew training. Mechanical reliability became a decisive factor in sustained combat operations, where equipment failures meant mission failure. The psychological impact on enemy forces became a permanent feature of American military doctrine. Troops facing technological superiority that rendered traditional military virtues inadequate experienced morale collapse that affected tactical performance beyond simple firepower calculations. The Sherman's invulnerability to Japanese anti-tank weapons created psychological dominance that amplified tactical advantages. Tank infantry telephone communication systems developed during Pacific operations became standard equipment throughout American armor units. Infantry soldiers could coordinate directly with tank commanders through external telephone systems, enabling precise tactical coordination that maximized combined arms effectiveness while minimizing friendly fire incidents. Specialized tank modifications for Pacific conditions influenced armor development through the Korean War and Vietnam conflict. Waterproofing techniques, tropical climate adaptations, and ammunition storage modifications became standard features in subsequent American tank designs. The Sherman's adaptability to extreme environmental conditions established design principles that continued for decades. Flamethrower tank variants, developed specifically for Pacific bunker warfare, proved devastatingly effective against Japanese cave positions on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The M4A3R3 Zippo could project napalm up to 150 yards, reaching deep into cave systems that were immune to conventional weapons. These specialized vehicles represented technological adaptation that gave American forces decisive capabilities against prepared positions. The Battle of Saipan lasted 25 days and claimed approximately 46,000 military casualties, plus thousands of civilian deaths, but its strategic outcome was determined during the first 6 hours when Sherman tanks systematically destroyed Japanese coastal defenses that had required 18 months to construct. Those 31-ton steel monsters rolling onto Pacific beaches represented far more than military hardware. They embodied American industrial capacity, projecting decisive power across global distances that no other nation could match. Japanese defenders, who had constructed supposedly impregnable fortifications, watched their concrete bunkers dissolve under 75mm gunfire, delivered with precision that made resistance futile. Warriors, trained in thousand-year-old traditions of individual courage, faced technological superiority that rendered personal valor irrelevant. The eternal conflict between human determination and mechanical capability was decided by American industrial production. Lieutenant Colonel Goto died in his command bunker on July 9th when organized resistance collapsed, choosing death over surrender despite tactical hopelessness. His final radio transmission to Tokyo described the fundamental transformation of warfare. American industrial capacity exceeds our ability to counter through traditional military methods. Recommend immediate development of new defensive doctrine based on technological reality rather than fighting spirit. Sergeant Morrison survived the Pacific War and returned to Detroit, where he resumed work in the automotive industry that had produced his Sherman tank. He rarely discussed combat experiences with family or friends, but he maintained detailed photographs of Colorado destroying Japanese fortifications. Those tanks, he told his children decades later, represented everything that made America different from every other country in the world. The strategic consequences extended far beyond Saipan's conquest to encompass the complete transformation of global warfare. American B-29 bombers operating from captured airfields conducted the most destructive strategic bombing campaign in history, culminating in atomic attacks that forced Japanese surrender. The Sherman tanks that secured those airfields made possible the strategic bombing that ended the Pacific War. Emperor Hirohito's surrender announcement on August 15, 1945, specifically cited a new and most cruel bomb, but the atomic weapons were merely the culmination of American technological superiority that had been demonstrated 15 months earlier on Saipan's beaches. Industrial capacity that could transport heavy armor across oceanic distances while maintaining complex supply chains represented capabilities that Japan simply could not match through superior fighting spirit or tactical innovation. Captain Yamada's sacrifice, along with his tank crews, represented the tragedy of courage confronting impossible odds. Japanese tankers who advanced against Sherman positions knew their equipment was inadequate and their tactical situation hopeless, but duty demanded maximum effort, regardless of probable outcome. Their destruction illustrated the human cost when traditional military virtues encountered industrial-age warfare. The Sherman tank's Pacific service demonstrated conclusively that modern warfare had become fundamentally industrial rather than purely tactical in nature. Superior manufacturing, transportation, and logistical capabilities determined battlefield outcomes more decisively than traditional military virtues of courage, training, and tactical skill. Technology didn't eliminate human factors, but it created decisive advantages that individual excellence couldn't overcome. The moral complexity of technological warfare troubled some American participants for decades afterward. Lieutenant Bale's post-war writings acknowledged that Japanese forces had demonstrated exceptional courage while fighting with inadequate equipment against overwhelming odds. "We respected our enemies as soldiers," he wrote, "but we understood that industrial capacity rather than individual virtue would determine the war's outcome." When Allied occupation forces landed on Japan's home islands in September 1945, they employed many of the same Sherman tanks that had first demonstrated American armored superiority on Saipan's beaches. The mechanical reliability that had sustained Pacific operations across thousands of miles and months of tropical combat continued through occupation duties until new international threats required new technological solutions. The age of American technological dominance in global warfare had been established irrevocably on those Pacific beaches, where Sherman tanks first proved that industrial supremacy could project decisive military power across any distance. World history pivoted on the mechanical reliability of twin diesel engines and the armor-penetrating capability of 75mm guns, operated by young Americans who understood that their nation's industrial capacity represented the ultimate military weapon of the modern age. Historical disclaimer. This account is based on extensive research using primary source materials, official military histories, and verified technical documentation. While major events, unit designations, and strategic outcomes are historically accurate, some specific dialogue and individual crew experiences are dramatized based on typical combat situations and participant accounts to illustrate the broader historical reality of Sherman tank operations in the Pacific theater.